Welcome. We are once again doing the PKI Insights webinar. It's May 2026. Welcome everyone. As people join, welcome to the chat. We'll be taking questions, and in fact, today is almost all questions and answers. So we'll spend just a quick minute doing introductions. This is really a continuation of our April webinar where we talked about ACME. Little did we know there was going to be such popular demand around questions. We ran out of time, and we kept collecting questions. We got feedback on Reddit. We got emails. It was pretty obvious we needed to pivot back to this. So this month, once again, joining me is Jake. Jake, you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Jake. I've been with Mark now. We're coming up on 9 years this summer, Mark. Yeah.
Has it really been that long?
It has been that long. It's hard to believe. Yeah. Wow. Lots of webinars later. Yeah. So this is an exciting time in PKI. A lot of stuff changing, a lot of stuff happening. So I'm excited to help share it with everyone that we're working with.
Well, excellent. Well, I'm going to actually turn off our slides so we can just spend a little time kind of talking head to head here a little bit. You know, as we pick up from the April webinar, we talked a little bit about ACME. And Jake, you want to just kind of spend a minute or two just kind of refreshing? I'm sure everybody spent the time here in April and heard about us, but let's just make sure that if anyone new that's joining or may watch this later on has a little bit of a basis.
Sure. Yeah. So, so the April webinar kind of came about because as I'm working with clients, automation has kind of become the thing right now for most of the organizations we're working with. A lot of it driven by the public CAs, and they're being forced to go to these shorter durations, but I think it's finally caught on, and now a lot of these same things are being applied to the internal and the private PKI. So one of the things that has come to the forefront as a possible solution for this automation has been the ACME protocol. And you know, in the webinar in April, we discussed some of the other things like SCEP, Simple Certificate Enrollment Protocol, and how ACME is kind of racing up on it, and looking to kind of maybe supplant it and be the new thing. So we touched on all the different ways that we could do automation with what we have right now. ADCS does not currently natively support ACME.
Yeah.
There are solutions out there that will facilitate it. And that's one of the things we can touch on a little bit today. But really, we got so much feedback. And I think there's so many questions from ACME, all the way from people just heard about it with Let's Encrypt. I think that's really where it got its start, like out in the public eye, to now where we're looking at, hey, how can we leverage this to add automation into our environments to the non-domain aware and possibly domain aware systems to roll these certificates a lot faster. Now these shorter dates have come around.
Yeah, absolutely. And we kind of touched on that in April, and that a lot of the questions were coming because of changes to the CAD forum, pushing towards 47 days in a couple of years. That kind of leads to questions around the enterprise and ACME and all those bits and pieces. So I think at the end of the day, the takeaway that I really had from the April webinar is there's a lot of questions around ACME. A lot of them have to do not so much with what is it, but more of how and why, and how are we actually going to make it happen? And we spent a little time talking about ACME is not always the solution, right? That there are sometimes just misunderstandings. We talked a little bit about decreasing lifetimes for public CAs don't necessarily impact your internal PKI, or if it's AD environment, you have auto. So we talked through some of those things, and then we started taking questions, and we ran out of time. So that really leads us to our May. So with that, Jake, how about we just kind of jump into the questions? We'll have the chat channel open, so anyone joining us live, if you have questions or if you want to add on to anything that we'll be going through we'll put those into the queue as well. So the first question that we have in the queue is, I'm going to quote here, I work with the vendors whose software doesn't have ACME automation and throws a security alert to the user every time a certificate changes or there's a certificate error. How do we compel vendors like this to get with the program? So I think what this kind of goes back to is, hey, I've got some application or appliance or something, doesn't do ACME. They're most likely using a self-signed certificate, which is what I'm going to kind of guess here if they're going to talk about certificate changes that, if you got a browser and you go to appliance and self-sign, you may click accept. Not a great idea, but
exactly.
The whole thing. How do we compel vendors to get with the program? So somewhat ACME tangential. I mean, what would you say to a customer that asked a question like this, Jake?
I would say from what I have seen, if you find a way to get vendors to move quickly, let us know, write us, so we can we'll give you full credit for it. But
yeah,
but most of the vendors I've seen, some are now starting to support ACME, but a lot of them that haven't come forward into ACME and some of the newer things, they do still, a lot of them support SCEP.
Yeah.
So that is a way to maybe to get through as a bridge to the promised land of ACME. But your guess is as good as ours when it comes to vendors. Sometimes it's real hard, and other times they really they come through and surprise us. So I don't think there's a magic solution there.
I would probably throw a couple of things out. I think one is sometimes customers underestimate what weight they have with vendors, and not knowing who's asking this question. Well, I'll always say is you may have more weight than you think with your vendor. If you're not going to the vendor and saying, hey, I want ACME, guess what? They may not be prioritizing it. So if you know that you got enough appliances or software or something, find your rep, your customer success team, someone, and say, we're going to move our business unless you find a way to do ACME, right? So we talk about this in the post-quantum space of, if you're waiting for the vendor to know what your needs are, they may not do it. So one, I would say absolutely make sure that you're talking to the vendor and you're submitting feedback or you're letting them know your needs. If it's important enough to your organization, escalate up your executive chain. Having your CISO or your CTO reach out to a vendor may carry more weight as well. So there's certain things you can do there. The other one that I've seen is finding out if you've got colleagues at related companies or in a portfolio or sister companies or trade organizations, band together. Nothing's more strong than 6 companies versus 1 company versus 100 companies. Right. Going to the vendor and saying, hey, we represent 25 companies and together we buy $50 million of your product. There's a lot more weight. So, there's kind of a grassroots approach to it. The other one is find out if they do webinars, show up asking questions about ACME. So there's probably a number of different ways to do this. And then, there's always the pragmatic, it probably won't change overnight. Okay, what can you do to do something better? If I'm reading this question that you're doing self-signed certs, I'd probably figure out, hey, if this is an internal appliance, you probably could be issuing certificates internally for 2 years, not worrying about untrusted self-signed certificates. You could do it without ACME. Now, obviously, if you tell me, hey, I've got 500 of these appliances that doesn't scale, I'll turn it right around and say, hey, if you got 500 of the appliances, guess what? You've got weight with that vendor because 500 of anything in the networking space probably is a decent amount of money. So
I agree.
There's probably a balance in there of a couple of different options that you can pursue.
Yeah, no, that's those are good. Definitely good points.
This reminds me a little bit when I was at Microsoft. One of the perpetual questions around ADCS was, when will ADCS support SQL Server? And I think we still get these questions. Yeah. And when I was at Microsoft, I would tell customers, I know exactly how you can make that request. And if your business is impacted enough that you will lose money by not being able to do this, and you can demonstrate that to Microsoft, submit the request. Because if Microsoft's going to lose your business, then they'll do something about it. And guess what? In 20 years, no one's ever come up with a compelling enough business case to say, hey, I'm going to lose $100 million worth of revenue from this customer walking away from Microsoft. haven't made the change. But
Right.
if you don't communicate it, you don't ask it, nothing will happen. So you're right. No magic answer, but there are probably things within your control that you could do.
Absolutely.
All right. Next question. What do you see as the solution for cross-platform enrollment solutions for enterprise PKI setups? This sounds like the answer is ACME, but there's probably a deeper answer there.
Yeah, that's one of those questions where you could spend a day on it. There's a lot there. Are they on your internal network? Are they external? Are they hybrid? Are they cloud joined? Or all of these things? We would ask those questions to try to kind of get some of that information out so we could give a better answer there. But I think the reason bringing ACME back in just for a second and SCEP to some point or some level is taking these protocols that are supported across different platforms kind of levels the playing field. And so I think that's why ACME has gotten so much attention recently, because it does have the possibility to do this. There are different CertBot, all the different things that we can do to leverage that to bring it back. There's big CLM vendors out there that would love to hear someone ask that question.
I think whatever you do, it's going to be a hybrid approach, right? Because ACME does not solve all use cases. It doesn't do anything for user certs. So if you're trying to do user authentication to Wi-Fi or VPN or SMINE for signing or encryption, that's not a machine-based certificate, and ACME is not going to work for you because ACME is dependent on DNS and machine identity. So anything that you do has to be a hybrid approach, and it's going to be maybe some Windows auto enrollment, maybe ACME in some places, manual enrollments for certain things. When you get to a point of, hey, I need certain types of SAN certificates and I need to bind them into certain types of Apache or Red Hat or
Right.
There's just certain functions that work differently. Then there's probably places where you need SCEP. So I don't think that there's one singular tool. I think the quote unquote, what is the solution is a hybrid approach and using automation where you can. And ACME is one way of doing that.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I'd say the old 80-20 rule that 20% of those systems consume 80% of our time to get them. Yeah. The other 80 are only 20, because we can get a lot of systems pretty easily with the tools we have today. It's those last little bits that sometimes that are really hard to get automation incorporated into Java key stores. Things like that are they tend to cause the most problem for our clients and big enterprises.
Let's take a question that was submitted by someone here. The question is DNS-based identities mandatory for all ACME flows? Can it support some type of non-DNS identity? I know I've got some thoughts on this, but Jake, do you have anything that you would respond there?
As I understand it, that's all part of the initial setup. We have of how we're doing this securely. So I don't know of a way to not do that. I'm not saying it couldn't be done. I'm just saying I don't know of a way, because that's all part of the configuration to know where it's coming from.
Yeah. And I think if we're talking like off-the-shelf CAN RFC specification, that's just the way ACME works. It's designed off of DNS. Now, the interesting thing is if you control both sides of the conversation, meaning the CA that's performing ACME lookups, if you're able to modify the endpoint that's doing enrollments, you could technically remove DNS in there, because DNS is just providing kind of an identity verification process, a challenge response. The ACME protocol, the bits and pieces of moving things around, you could repurpose that. I suspect you could go on a GitHub and you could find some existing ACME modules and reprogram them to do other things. I haven't seen anyone do that because ACME is really designed for that automation and machine levels side. But as I said before, ACME doesn't work for user-based identity. So it could be an interesting project to take one of those and say, I want to decouple it from DNS. I want to do LDAP lookups of Active Directory and go that approach. But I haven't seen any implementations that provide some other decoupling. I think what's interesting is this actually touches on a question I was surprised we didn't get, and I'll just kind of put it out there, was around this whole interest around internal use of certificates in ACME and customers that also do public CA. So, some customers will go to DigiCert and get certificates. And in some ways, ACME has a challenge in this scenario. So today, if you want to get external publicly trusted certificates from DigiCert, for instance, and put them on your machines, you can do that through manual enrollment. You can do some CLM tools. The challenge with ACME, though, is if this is an internal system, your internal system most likely is registering and using an internal DNS server, which DigiCert, when it does ACME challenge response, isn't going to be able to look in the same DNS server. It's most likely some type of split brain or maybe just an entirely different domain with no type of lookup. ACME is not going to work at all. So in these cases, ACME may work great for your publicly accessible machine sitting in some type of DNS that DigiCert can see. But for your internal systems, ACME is not going to help you go get certificates from an external public CA. It just doesn't have that functionality. So it's a little bit of a boundary that's going to affect those things in the future.
Right.
All right, let's take another question here. All right, this one's a little bit of a side, but we'll take them all as we go through. Jake, any thoughts on DigiCert's Trust Lifecycle Manager?
I don't have, actually, my thought on it is how I manage some of our certificates for PKI Solutions. We are a DigiCert client.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's a tool. I've spent a little time around PKI and I was confused by it.
Yeah. I think all of these CLM tools have their pros and cons, and none of them are perfect, but I haven't touched it, so I have no comment, but
we have some clients that are looking at it, and there are some, and I don't know where to separate. From what I've learned of it, I don't know how to separate the business from the technical, and some of the asks that I've been told as far as they need to be able to work with your internal CA. I mean, just all kinds of things like that, where I've always been very hesitant to give or relinquish that or have our clients do it. So I haven't had a chance to really get under the hood with it. But that's I don't want to say it's not really a PKI tool, but it kind of starts to fall outside the space that we play into of using the lifecycle management tools, in enterprise environments. I think, like you said, you probably come the closest in what we do for our external website kind of stuff. All right. Here's another question that was submitted. What do you guys recommend for deploying ACME or a different form of automation for a third-party hosting provider hosting content for us, and we provide the SSL cert and interacting with our ACME service? We want to enable automation, but I don't want to give the third party access to request whatever they want on behalf of our org. Okay. I may have breached this a little bit not too long ago, and when I was trying to kind of ferret out the answer of how to do this in such a way, I talked with the host, and I got this sent, basically a blank stare, but via chat and email, because I was trying to ask how to do something with DigiCert and their proprietary service, and everyone says we can do it, but there's no continuity.
Yeah,
and so I was struggling with it to get it to actually flow all the way through, and I was not successful all the way through to have that. So this exact same scenario is what we want, according to DigiCert, and I know all the most, I think, public CAs now have similar services offered to do this kind of thing. I couldn't find enough documentation on their site to then marry that up with the documentation from a host to actually get this to work all the way start to stop.
I think this kind of points out like one of the challenges is ACME is designed to be kind of an automated, lights out, hands off kind of automation. But now you're throwing in, but what if I don't trust, one of the parties fully, or how do I slow down the process so I can review it? Because like my instinct would be great, put it in some way, like into a pending state, and an administrator has to look at it and approve it. But ACME doesn't really support that type of stuff out of the box. So now I'd go back to this is a little bit of the old. If you don't trust somebody to do something, maybe you should reevaluate who you're trusting. If there's this third party that you can't really fully trust, then that's kind of a tough place to be, to say, well, how do I trust them? I don't know that ACME is necessarily going to be able to give you that level of control, because it wasn't designed that way. You may only be able to kind of do compliance, meaning looking at it after the fact. So if this is something in the public space, you could check CT logs, because whether it's Let's Encrypt or anything else that's doing ACME, you can see things that are published in your domain space. So you'll know what's out there, and something's not right, you deal with it and you track it down and you revoke it. It's after the fact, but at least better than nothing. If it's internally, you review your CA logs to see what's been issued, and you deal with compliance as opposed to governance. Not perfect, but I haven't really seen other ways that you can go in and interrupt how ACME works. Now again, maybe you could take a GitHub module, modify, and add these things in. To your point, it shouldn't be difficult. It's just no one really looks at it that way.
Well, yeah, but in this case, I think if this is being hosted on a third party, so we are limited in what we can likely do, and that's where I came. I kind of ran up against some issues. Is I don't really control much. I only have access to control what they allow me to control, even though they're hosting, my site or whatever. So that's where it got challenging.
All right, let's take another question here. Is our primary focus on ACME automation for server workloads like DNS, HTTP, TLS challenge types, or are you finding more common use cases for device certificates? So I think this is like client-side ACME enrollments for maybe mutual authentication or things, or are we mostly seeing this just for the server-side TLS, HTTPS kind of stuff?
For me, it's been almost exclusively all like more server-side and things like that. And we do have some clients that we're trying to do it in some other platforms, and ended up finding other solutions that were already available to them that might have been a little bit easier. Containers and things like that. So I think controlling it, like you mentioned earlier, Mark, of what can be requested in certificates, that's its own art form, to make sure that you have the constraints on there you want, but then to allow things to continue to function properly, to control different naming conventions. It's been mostly server type. I've not really seen anything around like more client-based applications.
Yeah, I agree. I really haven't seen it that way either. But that may be why people are kind of asking about more ACME or capabilities and ADCS or other things. So, I could certainly see where being able to do endpoint enrollment by ACME for a multiple forest Active Directory environment. We've historically had SESSEP.
Yeah,
we didn't have to do a SESSEP, and we could do ACME. I could see value there, but I haven't really seen much production use of it outside of that server side.
Yeah, same.
Yeah. Let's see here. Another question. Can you elaborate on different security concerns around using ACME and ACME accounts for certificate requests and domain validation?
So, like you mentioned, there's a lot of different solutions out there right now. GitHub is rife with different things that where you go out and pull down solutions. There's individuals out there selling kind of more of a canned solution. So from there on, but at the end of the day, what we're trying to do, if we're assuming that we're trying to take this all the way back to issue a certificate from ADCS, ADCS wants an account it knows to request that certificate. So whether it's going through our web server, and we're talking about like an application pool account, like a service account for running under a service account and doing things like that and limiting it, I would start to treat this a lot like I would any other service account, like I do for NDES or like I do for some of these others, and limit what they can do. I've not done a lot of testing around on this, but I don't know why it wouldn't work with like a group managed service account. Like we could do a lot of different things to try to tighten this up as much as possible.
Yeah.
But that would be what I'd go.
I think like anything, when you have automation, there's a greater concern around making sure that automation is secure, as well as making sure someone else's automation isn't affecting you. So like a good combination of if you're going to enable ACME for your external facing stuff, make sure you have a CAA record so that you're only doing ACME enrollment, where you're expecting it to go, and someone isn't setting up automation that is trying to impersonate you. Because the downside of automation is it makes brute force attacks and compromises that much easier when someone isn't manually sitting there trying to do all that stuff themselves.
Right. Because but like you mentioned earlier, by default, that the implementations I've seen, and we've done some POCs and worked some things out, and it works. But there are definitely some, like there is no pen to be able to observe. There's none of this. It's the request goes through your web server. It does that, and it forwards that request onto your CA, and then boom, it's issued.
Here's a question we got. How do you see ACME evolving for hybrid environments where organizations are using a mix of on-prem ADCS, cloud PKIs, and public CAs?
Well, I think public CAs, it's pretty well documented. Digicert and all these organizations, as it looks to me, their proprietary applications are building. They're using that protocol, but they're building their own things on top of it. What I would say when I work with clients, when it reminds me of when we implement a new certificate lifecycle manager. There's no reason that I can see to throw away what works really well right now, which is if you have in a hybrid environment, you may have domain join devices. Those are really easy to get to. Those are the last of our concern because we can get those certificates all day long. Let's focus on the hybrid join. What's the solution there? What connectivity they have, and just kind of take care of the low hanging fruit first, and then focus on the ones that are more challenging. And then we start to bring in the different types of tools and see what we can get to them with.
I think there's some interesting things that I don't know anyone per se that has this plan, but looking at the hybrid approach, there's definitely some advantages that ACME has from a protocol standpoint that could become a more universal ADCS integrated, public CA integrated, cloud PKI integrated protocol that is adapted to each of those environments. So there's a consistency. So just like we have SCEP today, we have SESCEP, we have RPCDCOM approach with Microsoft ADCS. Mm-hmm. There's different protocols. They're limited. It's vendor specific kind of stuff. SCEP is the closest that we have to kind of a universal. Almost everything that supports ACME will support SCEP to some degree, but it's not secure. It wasn't designed for automation, and it has issues, right? If we look at how SCEP has been adapted over the years and say manufacturers could just as easily do that with ACME and move to an automation model, it's the closest to a one true language. Like what was it in the 80s? Esperanza, the old universal language that, there'd just be one language for everybody in the world to speak. ACME has the potential to do that. And yes, it would have to get modified to work natively inside of 80 for user environments. But it has the abstraction a lot like SCEP does. But there really isn't like an industry body or anyone that would really kind of push that approach. If you look at the origins of SCEP, that came from Cisco. And it was simply Cisco writing a protocol to try to get certificates for their routers and switches back in the day, and just happened to get picked up because everybody needed to support Cisco. So it wasn't even necessarily designed to become an industry standard, but it's the closest that we have outside of ACME. Esperanto, thank you. I got about that. Of course, that's Joe. All right, let's see here. We talked about the third party. All right. Another question. If I'm building EJBCA, then is StepSess considered inferior compared to ACME, with the exception of ACME, which is not good for user enrollment, as stated in the seminar? So a little confusing because we got EJBCA and SEP there, but it could work. EJBCA does have the way of kind of impersonating a Microsoft AD PKI. So I imagine you could deploy Microsoft SEP. So why don't we boil this down to, is SEP inferior to ACME?
There are limitations, definitely. I would say my personal opinion of this, and this is something I used to argue with Adams about all the time. Adams is a huge proponent of SEP, and so is Mark W. It is the least utilized role of all of them. I see in our clients across the board, like not even close. Yeah. No one has rolled that out, but it works pretty well when it works if you know what to do. But there's that first step first, like to keep it as secure as possible. So I don't know if it's better there. I think we're maybe apples and oranges or apples and peaches. I don't know. Either way.
Well, it probably goes back to my famous line everybody hates. It depends. SEP is great because that really came out during my time at Microsoft, and at one point we had 22 internal PKIs at Microsoft, and it was all because of different forests, different domains, different types of trusts. And SEP was, hey, how do we bridge this DCOM RPC traffic into a HTTPS kind of SSL protected traffic? That's what SEP is designed to do. It allows you to take a single PKI and enroll users and computers from multiple forests without setting up 22 different PKIs or 22 different issuing CAs. So there's a lot of benefit to that kind of an approach. I would say compared to ACME, it does user certs. It works great. It works with your existing enterprise PKI that you already have. If you want to do ACME, you're going to need something other than the ADCS, which means you're going to go deploy EJBCA or spend money on EJBCA. And then you could do ACME, but guess what? You're not going to do your user certs. So what are you going to do for your user certs? You're going to have to go buy a CLM product or something else. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily inferior unless we boil it down to specific scenarios to say, hey, I've got 22 disjointed networks. I only need to do machine-based certificates. I got a unified DNS, and I have a PKI that supports ACME or SEP. I would say do ACME. So it's probably which tool is the right one to solve a problem.
No, I would agree with that. I know some of the big CLMs also facilitate a lot of different ways to do certificate enrollments across lots of different forests and whatnot. So there's that, and then they also can facilitate ACME and virtual SCEP and a lot of different things. But what tool is going to work the best? What's in your budget to do? Do you have the people to run both EJBCA, ADCS, and all the different tools, because those skill sets are even more rare that I've found.
I have another question. Have you seen challenges within enterprises deploying ACME and the automation of HTTP and DNS challenges with issuing certificates?
As far as is a question around, you technically could do enrollment over port 80 and environment for killing?
I'm reading this as, no, are there challenges when you're using ACME of kind of doing the automation of the HTTP bindings and bits and pieces, as well as the DNS challenges and responses, the underlying bits and pieces that make ACME work? So aside from the protocol of getting from the endpoint to the CA and back, do we tend to see challenges with those other bits and pieces? I'll at least say from my standpoint, I absolutely have. Like the protocol is the easy part. The challenge is often, the DNS lookup isn't right. The challenges aren't right. They can't be looked at. They're not cached. They're not replicated. Or then it gets to, okay, I've got the certificate, but it's not being bound to the right port, not being bound to the right website. It's ACME doesn't solve all of the bits and pieces from the beginning to the end. It's the enrollment and request and certificate and renewal. Your system still has to know, oh, I need to make a request. No, I was just working on some network equipment that we have. I'm like, okay, great. I got this, ACME-based enrollment certificate. It worked great. But then my next sets of questions were, is it actually bound to this device? And is it working? Is it going to automatically go out and do the renewal? And when the renewal happens, will it rebind the new one? So that's where a lot of the challenges come up. And sometimes it's just the unknown. It was really just, I don't know, because it's not oftentimes clearly spelled out. You may have a piece of software that says we do ACME. Like, great, I got a cert, everything's working great. It doesn't say anything about how it handles the renewal, 6 months from now. And will I get a notification if it doesn't do it, or what? So I think there's still a lot of that operational challenges, even with something like that.
Yeah, I would just say, the only thing I would add there is just a kind of level set is ACME has become this almost like cloud was back in the day. So we think about when cloud first came along and everyone was using cloud for everything. It's going to be everything. And then Mark, you and I had a discussion earlier today about Azure and the rabbit holes you can go down. And we were just talking about licensing. Yeah. And that's all that granularity in there. And in the past, we just said cloud and it covered all of it. And that's, I think, where we are a little bit with ACME now. ACME is just a protocol that we can utilize, but there's so much that has to be built on top of it to actually complete the mission, like you were just saying.
Yeah, and I think there's weaknesses. Somebody just submitted an item around ACME saying security guys don't like port 80. So you should have a service allowing for alternate ports or support ACME, TLS. This scenario I was just talking about, I ran into this piece of networking equipment I have is kind of facing the internet. And, some of the first instincts I do is, okay, turn off 443, turn off port 80, redirect everything to HC, like all the stuff that you would expect of, hey, I don't want the internet kind of being able to access this stuff. Well, guess what? It breaks ACME because ACME comes back and wants port 80 access. So then you get into this real specific carving out of, hey, how do I allow this exception to allow this thing to come through on this unsecure? In many ways, as quote unquote, as new as ACME is, it doesn't really address all of the current security things that are kind of common practice today. So we're already, just like we had to deal with SCEP and password issues, we're dealing with ACME's issues as well. And I agree, we need something that kind of does an alternate port or some other response port. It'd be great if I could go and in my ACME settings say, you can contact me on this port. Don't try the default port. And they don't do that.
Right.
Let's see here. Another question is enterprise workloads on ECS, EKS are exposed to the on-prem network through an API gateway. In such cases, the workload URLs are not visible to the internal DNS server, and their local routes are not visible as well. How are you solving such challenges where these workloads require certificates for mutual TLS? So this is, hey, I've got some stuff sitting in part of the network where not all of it's exposed to DNS. Like I want to do ACME, but my network isn't completely connected. I can't see point to point, all of those bits and things. Like when we kind of deal with our customers and they're trying to get certificates in fragmented parts of their network, what do you often talk about?
Usually it comes down to the first thing we always go through, and I'm looking at this like to apply like Active Directory terms, that they have a DMZ or something, and it's not very big. And it usually comes down to scale. So initially, it's easy to handle it when it's smaller scale with something that is more manual. But then as it grows, it gets to be a point where it's not feasible any longer. Then we have to start looking at other solutions. So there's going to have to be at some point a compromise, and whether that means building into that environment for that environment to service it, or allowing something in or out. I mean, something will eventually have to give.
Yeah, exactly. There's just sometimes, if you're going to deal with an automation that requires DNS as identification, DNS has to work, or endpoints have to be exposed. If not, then you're kind of going into these automation life cycles of needing scripts or PowerShells. And I'm amazed, even just working inside of things like Azure, of just how much stuff, like the documentation just stops and says, go to the command line interface for Azure and do these things, because it's just too complex. There's just some places where the automation is probably designed for 80-20, right? The 80% of the time, can I get this automation to work? And for the internet facing stuff, 80% or more is probably all server side, TLS kind of stuff. So ACME works great. And we get these fringe use cases of users and endpoints and mutual TLS. Okay, that's the 20% rule, doesn't fall in there. And then you've got these other places where, hey, I want to do ACME, but I've got these fragmented networks. Yeah, you're in that 20%. That probably goes to what we were talking about earlier. It's gonna have to be a hybrid strategy. You're gonna have different types of tools getting different places. I think at the end, if you look at the strategies, I need automation. One cheap, free way of doing that is ACME. Another cheap, free way of doing that is scripts. Another expensive, not free way of doing it is buying a CLM, right? So, but I put together an automation strategy as opposed to my strategy is ACME, because ACME won't work in all cases any more than Microsoft RPC DCOM or SESAP or SCAP. It's got to be a hybrid. You're going to have to go through different approaches there. Well, let's take one more question here. We have 4 NDIS servers to issue certificates for network authentication, autopilot, clients, and Jamf connected Macs. Is there a way to restrict ACME for specific parts of DNS where the clients live? Do I have to add .win, mac.example.com to map it correctly to specific templates?
Yes. So the applications I've seen and how this would normally be done would be a template is like if you were running a web server, for instance, you might have a directory or a site directed to or for a template. And we map it out by templates that way. We're not going to use the same template multiple times. So yeah, basically we're going to have to be very strategic in all those different use cases. If there's four different NDES servers there, autopilot and this and that. The backside NDES could all be pulling from the same template in Active Directory and going out, to all of those. Whereas from what I've seen doing this in larger environments, we configure for a template for these use cases, a template for these use cases, and that's how we split them up. So that's what I've seen done to limit that and be more prescribed.
Yeah. Perfect. All right. Well, we are just about out of time. What I want to touch on is an interesting thing that we have coming up. So I don't think we have a slide for this, but what I did want to say is we have potentially a very special guest joining us next month. I'm not at liberty to say. What I will say is our April webinar on ACME was, I think, our second largest turnout. It would not surprise me if our June webinar with this special guest who will be joining us, speaking very authoritatively, makes all of those numbers look very small. So I was hoping we'd be able to make the announcement. I'm looking to my team to see if anyone's pinging me right now to see if we got the thumbs up this morning. But please look for our announcement around our June webinar. I think it will be a very, very interesting topic. We're excited to bring this special guest and come talk PKI. In the meantime, as always, we can't help but to answer questions. So if there's anyone that watches this on our future YouTube channel, or you have any questions, send them in. We'll always do our best to get back to you. If you participated in our polls today, thank you. We're continuing to shape and work on how we do these contents going forward. While it doesn't do any good to anyone who hasn't seen this yet, we will always make these webinars available online. It's our number one question we get after every webinar is, hey, I missed it. Are you going to put it up? The answer is always yes. So if you have any coworkers, if you see one of these and you miss a future one, just know that we do our best within a day or two to get this up on our YouTube channel. So with that, Jake, any parting words?
Well, I would just add that we know they're always up there because my kids make fun of me when they see it on YouTube.
Same thing.
Oh, it's out there.
my son's like, Dad, I didn't know you guys had a YouTube channel. I go, you can learn all you want about PKI. Yep. So go check it out. Well, thank you all for joining us for this extended Q&A session on ACME. I look forward to seeing you and a whole lot of other people at our June event. So have a great May, and see you next month. Bye-bye.
Thank you.